I think there's a key issue that came up in the last discussion, and I don't think it's one thing or the other. But while you can have counter-narratives, you can say the ISIS narrative is lousy. At some point, you have to say, here's a narrative that's good, which is what I think Miriam was saying. But it strikes me as so much the way academia and some bureaucracies work, that it's talked about as an either-or thing. In fact, you can say the ISIS narrative is lousy, and you can find narratives that people can join. I'm not sure sports and that kind of thing is the best thing, because there are a number of studies that show that a lot of people who engaged in terrorism pre-ISIS got to know each other on soccer teams and basketball teams. So I'm not sure that sports is necessarily the way to go. But the idea of looking for another narrative that's a positive narrative is, I think, hugely important. And when you look at the heroic narratives, heroic, entre guillemets, narratives of ISIS, you think, what can you replace those with? I'm not sure we have an answer to that. But any thoughts on that, I'd be glad to hear, starting with Anne.
Oh, jeez. Well, absolutely we need alternative narratives, and I also agree it's not either or, it's both. And the government needs to be speaking to you in a way and offering you opportunities so that you're happy and that you don't resonate to a terrorist call. But we have to understand that if we just make a message of, you live in the EU and life is good, if your life isn't good, and if on a daily basis you're facing discrimination and marginalization, you're going to completely dismiss that message. But if you're invited to something that is good, and you feel excited about it, then you may dismiss the ISIS message. So it is both.
I agree.
The other quick question I have, and then I'll open up the floor, is we've been talking about people coming back from Syria and Iraq who've been in ISIS. But I know in France there's a major problem looming on the horizon, and that is a lot of people who wanted to join ISIS, who were jihadists, who were jailed because they were jihadists, have been in jail with other jihadists, and now they're being released. A lot of them are being released. What do you do about them? They have not had 4 years or 6 years of counter-narrative. They've had 4 or 6 years of strengthening the narrative within the prisons of Europe. What do you do about them?
Yeah, certainly not to forget about them, because a lot of them are, if they're not end of punishment and they get free conditionally, then there's something you can do. And the judges more and more now impose on them some sort of de-red trajectory, which gets more and more streamlined, and that's a good thing. And on the other hand, those who are who have served their prison sentence, there's no conditions anymore, so they get free. They return to their home, and then it's up in Belgium to the local task force and the local integrated security cell, which was Beatrice who explained that to you, to do the follow-up. And so even if they are end of penalty, when we think that there is still a threat stemming from these persons, and they are not entirely de-radicalized, which is quite often the case if they come out of prison. It's not the best place to de-radicalize people. Then there will be a follow-up, and that can be a follow-up that is more security-oriented. When the person is still heavily involved in extremist contacts and ideology, or if the person is willing to cooperate with the authorities and is reducing his or her contacts with the extremist scene, we think of alternative measures, and then it will be more social positive measures, and that can go from helping them to find a job, job training program, etc. There can be assistance given to the family, etc., etc. A lot of social preventive work can then be done. But those persons and ex-prisoners will be followed upon and many of them for many years. It's the best what we can do. The problem is you cannot impose somebody to de-radicalize. And you can have the best programs in the world, you can have whatever you want, but there is no whitewashing machine. You cannot have people come out of prisons and then we put them in a de-rad program and they will come out whitewashed, clean, and we don't have to worry about them anymore. It's really case-by-case based business, and you have to organize yourself that you can follow them each individually, and do it and be ready for the long run.
En ce qui concerne les mesures de prévention du radicalisme et du terrorisme, effectivement, nous devons tous nous tenir par la main, que ce soit au niveau policier, judiciaire ou social. Ce n'est que de cette façon que nous arriverons à lutter contre le terrorisme et permettre à des jeunes, mais aussi des moins jeunes, à se désengager. Je vous ai parlé tout à l'heure du suivi policier ou du suivi social. Je crois qu'il y a encore du travail à faire en cette matière, que ce soit tant de la part des services policiers que sociaux. Il nous faut encore des outils, surtout au niveau social, pour pouvoir vraiment permettre à ces personnes qui sont radicalisées de se désengager, mais aussi des outils qui permettraient de mieux travailler en matière de prévention. Mais je suis vraiment je ne trouve pas mes mots, mais je veux dire qu'en Belgique, on arrive vraiment à développer beaucoup de moyens maintenant et d'outils en matière de lutte contre le radicalisme et en matière de prévention.
Just a small thing to add to what Beatrice said. Importance now and the challenge in Belgium is indeed the social sector, to convince them that they need to share at least a minimum of information, give feedback to the security side. Even if the mechanisms exist, you may have the best laws to cover them so that they can break the professional secrecy that is very characteristic for their work. They don't have to tell us the details. We don't have to know everything from that is going on between the professional and the persons they take care of. But at least we do have to know if a person is involved in some kind of program and how she or he is evolving. Is it going in a positive way and in a negative way? We need to have feedback from psychiatric institutions, from closed youth institutions, etc. And that's still a challenge to go. A lot of it's confidence building, so I think it will take just time, more than a legal framework to achieve that.
Can I say something on this? Sorry, I can't resist this. We're preparing, Dr. Ardian and I, to go to Kazakhstan after we leave Belgium for a UN ODC conference where they're asking exactly these questions. So we were sitting and thinking about it. Also this summer we were in Kosovo and met with one of the ISIS guys that we had interviewed in prison, and he's now released. And we interviewed him again and had a nice dinner together, but during the dinner he told us that he had radicalized further in prison, that he was able to get access to the writings of Makdisi and Ibrahim Millet, and that they studied it in Albanian language in prison. So, you know, how is he getting access to this? He also said that he wished us to get beheaded on our next trip to Syria. So, and he said that his duty was, and every duty of Muslims that are following the true Islam, according to him, was to kill everyone else except for Muslims. So I was glad that Ardian was sitting between the two of us, and is also a big, strong man that I know would protect me. And I did ask him, do you have a knife at his plate? Because, you know, it's a bit frightening to listen to this. But this is a guy just released from prison, and in a prison that says it has a program, but it didn't reach him. And the other thing that I want to point out is we've had cases in France where serious jihadists are in prison for a longer time, and a young man comes in on some minor criminal charge. He's scared in prison. He finds a protector, and this guy quickly radicalizes him. And by the time he goes out on his short sentence, he has a whole group that this ISIS guy or Al-Qaeda guy or whatever he happens to be has set up for him. So when you go out, I have follow-up for you. So what I want to convince you is if we don't do it, ISIS will do it. And they are service providers. And they have charismatic recruiters. So we, sorry, it's true. And so we have to act like them to a certain extent and find out what's working for them. If it's working for them, it might work for us. Maybe we have to provide protection, comfort, fellowship, follow-up inside prison. We also have to really cultivate informers. And we have to think about prevention in prison. And that's somewhere I would also love our videos to be used, or whatever tool works. I don't care if it's our videos, but we need to be doing prevention because they're doing recruitment.
Well, I think I want to open the floor to questions now, but I think to give an idea just how difficult this job is that everybody's talking about, I think we need to remember how close several terrorists that created huge damage in Europe were to the police. They were followed by the police. Mohammed Merah was a classic example. They were followed by the police. They were known by the police. They were in touch with the police. They'd been in prison. They had records. They had fiches. They had everything, and they still did what they did. So you can follow them, but we don't have even one cop for every terrorist. We have one cop for every God knows how many. And that's if you can be sure that they are terrorists. So with that happy thought, I'll open the floor to questions. Did you have a question? Yes. Do we have a microphone for the audience? Yeah, sure.
Merci, monsieur. Je m'exprime en français, mais je suppose que Pascal ou Abit pourront traduire en anglais. Je suis, comme tout le monde ici, terrorisé par les images et par les narrations qu'on nous a faites. Mais pour moi, personnellement, qui je suis un homme politique, je suis plus terrorisé encore qu'on n'aborde pas le vrai sujet du terrorisme, à savoir l'armement. L'ambassadeur du Qatar, est vraiment, parce qu'il est là et qu'il s'est exprimé, mais je n'ai pas de problème avec lui, ni avec personne d'ailleurs, il a dit on a débloqué 5 millions de dollars pour l'instruction. J'aimerais bien savoir ce que le Qatar a dépensé comme argent pour acheter des armements américains. Quand j'entends Donald Trump, pour qui je n'ai que du mépris, quand j'entends qu'il dit que parce qu'on a tué un journaliste d'une façon barbare, ça ne justifie pas de rompre les accords et le dialogue pour ne pas laisser échapper à marché de 100 milliards de dollars d'armement vers les Chinois ou vers les Russes. Alors, le terrorisme religieux, on le connaît depuis la nuit des temps. Nous, les Européens, nos ancêtres, nos ancêtres, on a organisé des caravanes expéditives terroristes lorsqu'on a fait les croisades il y a 1000 ans. Et c'était pour aller, soi-disant, aussi faire payer les autres infidèles parce qu'ils étaient dans d'autres secteurs. Je crois que malgré tout le travail formidable que vous faites, d'information, si à un moment donné, on n'intervient pas politiquement, par tous les moyens que nous, les responsables politiques, avons à notre disposition, le dernier achat des F-35 par la Belgique, aux Américains plutôt que d'acheter les Rafales, c'était un marché simplement pour faire plaisir à Donald Trump. Et vous comprenez combien moi je suis irrité par cela. Mais si on ne dit pas à un moment donné, on continue la lutte des cellules parce qu'il faut arrêter les attentats, mais si on ne limite pas et qu'on ne contrôle pas les armements, le coût de l'armement américain pour son économie justifie tous les terrorismes du monde. Arrêtez de vendre des armes, vous n'aurez plus de terroristes.
I'm not sure. What he was saying is basically that the final remark was that the cost of American arms justifies terrorism all around the world. Okay, that's sort of a kind of an Al-Qaeda kind of argument, excuse me, but it's taking one thing and making it equal to another. I think what we're talking about now is dealing at the grassroots level with people who are attracted by the idea of terrorism in the terms that we were discussing. if we want to discuss the idiocy of American policy in support of arms sales, that's another question. And I agree, it's crazy, it's insane. We just published at the Daily Beast an excellent story about how arms get to South Sudan, where the bullets come from, very detailed. How they go from Europe to Uganda, old Soviet weapons, all of that stuff goes on. We get that. But you can work against that, and you are still not going to affect the minds of people who are going to go get hydrogen peroxide from the beauty parlor and make TATP explosives and blow themselves and other people up. So it's not just a question of arms, if I may respond to that. Another question? Back here? Well, wait, oh, okay. Well, there's another guy right behind you, so he's next.
I will speak also in French. It's easier for me, if you don't mind.
Oh, but your English is so good.
D'abord, je voudrais vous remercier vraiment pour la qualité de cette conférence. C'est très précieux, c'est très important. Merci à Hans Kempart, merci à Amit Sebali. Je suis moi-même député fédéral et belge, et j'ai été très impliqué dans la commission d'enquête sur les attentats terroristes ici en Belgique, et donc je suis ces questions de terrorisme depuis longtemps. J'ai eu l'occasion, comme vous d'ailleurs, d'aller en Syrie du Nord récemment et de voir la petite Lina et de voir effectivement, de l'interroger. Effectivement, cela reste très préoccupant de la savoir là-bas dans le nord de la Syrie. Et merci à tous les intervenants. Et j'aurais voulu vous poser une question sur... il me semble qu'il y a un élément qu'on ne traite pas suffisamment. Et qui est que ce terrorisme n'est pas né de nulle part. Il est né effectivement dans un contexte idéologique d'islam radical qui est là depuis plusieurs décennies. Et je pense que M. Verkotteren de l'OCAM en a parlé notamment sur cet islam qui continue à être extrêmement présent dans nos sociétés, avec une volonté de diviser nos sociétés, avec une volonté de ségrégation, avec une volonté de radicalisation des communautés, d'instrumentalisation des communautés musulmanes. Et donc, au-delà du contre-discours, au-delà de l'interdiction de discours prêchant la violence, la haine et le terrorisme, je pense qu'il y a aussi tout un travail vraiment qui doit être fait au niveau européen, qui a été entamé depuis quelques années au niveau belge. Et il y a eu un rapport de l'OCAM, notamment extrêmement intéressant, il y a une année, qui a montré le parallélisme qui existait entre l'islam radical et le terrorisme, donc la continuité qu'il pouvait y avoir entre ces deux problèmes, et donc j'ai l'impression qu'on ne travaille pas assez là-dessus. Il vient d'y avoir de nouveau un rapport de la Sûreté de l'État en Belgique disant que le salafisme continuait à progresser en Belgique. Et cela continue à être une menace sur nos sociétés, et ça continue à inspirer les terroristes. Et donc, et quand je parle de cela, j'ai toujours l'impression que cela évoque insuffisamment de réactions et de propositions au niveau politique, et notamment qu'il n'y a pas que de coordination au niveau européen là-dessus, parce qu'il n'y a pas que la Belgique qui est sous cette menace. Il n'y a d'ailleurs pas que le salafisme qui pose un problème comme islam radical, mais donc il y a cette influence et cette volonté de la part de puissances étrangères de financer un islam radical qui lui-même peut éventuellement déboucher sur des actions violentes et sur du terrorisme. Et je trouve que nous ne sommes pas du tout suffisamment équipés aujourd'hui par rapport à ce discours-là, qui n'est pas un discours de terrorisme, mais qui est un discours de ségrégation, de renfermement sur soi-même, d'exclusion et de haine de l'autre finalement, à travers que ce soit un discours qu'on peut trouver dans des mosquées, dans des bibliothèques, dans des manuels, dans des écoles aujourd'hui. Et donc je trouve que c'est véritablement aussi une urgence pour nos sociétés.
Yeah, I will try to answer a little, though. Yes, you said yourself. I already evoked it in my speech. There is indeed a problem of religious, and I said extremism, not Islam, in our societies, because we should make a difference between the traditional, normal forms of belief, whether they are Islam or not, who have their place in our societies, and our societies also are, I think, more and more ready to accept these religious forms that are not extremist. So that is not. I was not talking about Islam in general, of course. But as you rightfully pointed out, there is a problem in our country, in many European countries, and throughout the world, Africa, wherever you get it, with a continuous stream of religious extremism that seems to be is financed by certain countries in the Middle East, in the Gulf. We don't have to hide the names if you want, but it is. It's a pity that Gilles de Kerkhoven already left, because he could have told you much more about the initiatives that are ongoing in our country, national level, but also in European level. There is now a lot of initiatives being taken on the level of the EU, the countries themselves. A lot of awareness building is going on. And Gilles himself, I think, he has brought it forward everywhere he goes, on many fora. And he's also in favor, I think we as well as Belgians, we should be open to them, frank dialogue, and explain them that we cannot permit any form of extremism to be spread through religion. That's simply not possible and not acceptable. Every segregation, hatred against other believers, Muslim believers, against all forms of anti-Semitism, etc., they have no place in religious textbooks, and this should stop. We have to really send clear and sound messages to these countries, and I think the best is to go in dialogue with them and to tell them that, well, what we find in the textbooks that are still being spread and throughout the whole throughout our country, throughout many countries, is simply not acceptable for a democratic society. It is diametrically opposed to the values of our society, and it should stop. Point. How? I think it's a long process, but I think it's political, it's national, it's European, it is even worldwide, I would say. It needs awareness building. And then it's also, I think we are now in that phase that we are thinking of what to do, how can we tackle it. In Belgium there is initiatives being taken, the Grand Mosque, etc. It's not to Occam, of course, to do that, but our role is to inform about possible threats that come from these messages. And I think that is the role we have done well so far.
Thank you so much for your comment, both of you. And one thing I'd like to say is sometimes our politicians find it advantageous to use these issues, and they are responsible for further polarizing. Like in our country, yeah, I can name names. We started referring to Muslim extremism instead of extremism in general, and actually most of the extremist acts in the US are carried out by the far right. And you know the problems that we have. And everywhere we've seen that politicians can benefit from stirring the pot this way. And the other things with arms sales, I'm in agreement with Chris, but I also want to say all of our countries had a really hard time figuring out how do we support the uprising in Syria, who are our partners, who can we arm, and should we arm them? And there's been a lot of regrets. We've had American arms end up in the hands of ISIS. I just read an article about Netherlands that they discovered the same. And every country has had these issues of, you know, how do we help for justice without making the problem even worse?
Oui, Monsieur d'Allemagne, vous parliez tout à l'heure de l'instrumentalisation de la communauté musulmane. Moi, je vous parlerai aussi de polarisation, mais aussi de repli communautaire. Et nous assistons effectivement dans différentes provinces, mais notamment dans la province de Liège, à un certain repli communautaire avec un enseignement à domicile. L'enseignement à domicile en soi ne pose pas de problème, mais celui-là semble en poser problème. Si ce n'est pas à court terme, ce sera à long terme. Avec interdiction pour les enfants d'aller à l'école, avec interdiction pour les jeunes filles, bien sûr, d'aller à l'école ou de sortir de chez elles ou encore de travailler. Et pour moi, là, est-ce que le repli de ce type-là, est-ce que se renfermer, s'enfermer dans une communauté sans avoir de contact avec l'extérieur pose problème? Aujourd'hui, je ne vais pas me poser par rapport à oui ou non, mais je pense que à l'avenir, ça risque peut-être de poser problème. Et là, je pense qu'il y a du travail à faire maintenant en ce qui concerne l'enseignement à domicile, en tout cas une vérification beaucoup plus stricte que ce qu'il existe actuellement, avec, bien sûr, il faudra des conséquences par rapport aux parents ou aux allocations familiales, que sais-je, mais il faut intervenir maintenant.
I would just say that it's a couple of quick observations. First of all, we can't talk about Islam. There are lots of different kinds of Islam. One of the characteristics, the core characteristics of the so-called Islamic State is that it is takfiri. If you don't believe in Islam exactly the way it believes in Islam, you're a dead man or woman, as the case may be. Particularly if you're Shia, then you are really a dead person. You're devil dead, yes. The whole thrust, in fact, of the Islamic State is much less anti-Western than it is anti-Persian, anti-Shia. And I think that often goes completely ignored. And it's important to understand that. The other thing that I think, just as a journalist covering these issues for some time in Europe, is that the emphasis is always on actually the very small minority of jihadis. It's true that there has been a lot of Salafi infiltration and even Takfiri infiltration of the banlieue in Paris, and I'm sure here in Belgium and elsewhere. But it's also true that there's been a huge amount of integration of very large Muslim populations. And whenever I've seen in France, particularly under Sarkozy, there was this whole thing about banning the burqa. Well, nobody ever wore burqas in France, but banning the niqab, full-face veils. Okay, so at the time, the renseignements généraux decided there were about 9,000 women in France who wore the niqab. Now, if we believe, of course the numbers are vague in France, but if we believe that there are, say, 6 million Muslims in France, and say 3 million or 2 million are women, to have 9,000 wearing the niqab, that's going to be an issue? Who counted how many of them wear bikinis? Nobody. Nobody. But the emphasis is always on the threat of the extremist. And I think it's hugely misleading. So that's just my humble opinion here. You've seen how humble I am. So any more questions? I think, oh yes, this gentleman who was very patient.
Yeah, I got the mic before him. So, hi everyone. I'm George Shabib. Thank you for inviting me, Anne, and congratulations for this beautiful work you've been doing. I've been following you for a long time, as you know, and it's really great to see everyone praising your job, and I think it's really it's deserved. So my question is actually, I've seen all this video, and you know, the focus on this counter narrative was mostly on trying to explain to everyone. That's the way I understood it, is that to explain to everyone that, you know, where you're going is not real Islam. Real Islam is like what you created even a website called the Real Jihad, right? So you're trying to redirect everyone to real Islam or real jihad. So if this is like what I understand the counter narrative. But my question is, where do our values as Western democracies or liberal democracies, not only Westerns, I mean there's other countries not Westerns that are liberal democracies. So where do our values fit in this counter narratives? So do we have like something to sell? I mean, can we fight, this jihadism with our own values, democracy, rules of law, all those things that we, and all those guys that left for Syria, they mostly left from our countries. They were actually born and raised in, and we failed to actually convince them about our values. And so how do, we actually bring back our values, and how do we push our values instead of trying to tell them, okay, the Islam you're going for is not the good one. We should, teach you what is the real Islam. No, my question is, how do we actually push back, and showing them that our values are the good one, and that it's worth actually, believing in our values. That's the first question. And second question, which is subsidiary, is you showed this video, this heartbreaking video about this kid that actually deserved, in my opinion, to come back to Belgium, but that's actually, I understand it's a very difficult debate. So, and my question is, how do, by accepting them or not, or rejecting them actually, not letting them come back to Belgium, how do that fit in our, the values, our values that we want to actually promote, which are actually, forgiveness, or one of them, or like, rules of law, and all those things, how this, debates fit in this counter-narrative about our values. That's, that was my question. It's subsidiary to the first one, basically, but that's it. Thank you.
I'll let Anne answer the second one. If I just might answer the first one myself, I would say, if you want to preach values, you have to live by those values. And we see less and less of that in the leadership of the West these days, particularly in the leadership of the United States. Hey, might as well say it. It's true. It's obvious. We have now a kind of a reverence for strong men who don't believe in any of those values, whether they're in Russia or China or in the White House. And I think that is a huge issue in the broader counter-narrative. But on the question of the child coming back, Anne?
Well, first I'd like to say we're not trying to talk anybody into any Islam. In fact, we don't consider our program religious, but we do have a sheikh, a scholar, that any of the Islamic issues that come up in the counter-narratives are addressed. So he will tell you, and actually we just had a wonderful interview that we couldn't record with Jermaine Grant. He went to Kenya, he's a UK citizen, went to Kenya to join the jihad. I think he was in Somalia with Al-Shabaab. He couldn't tell us because he was up for his court proceedings. But he told us blah, 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 all the narrative. And I said, I wish Sheikh Ali was here to argue with you, because I can't. And I can tell you, I know you have it wrong here, but I don't know exactly why. So they had a debate by letter, because I gave Sheikh Ali all his Takfiri interpretations of Islam, and Sheikh Ali said, and he said the best scholars are the ISIS and Al-Qaeda scholars. And I said, no, the best armed scholars are the ISIS and Al-Qaeda. But the best scholars are people that have actually studied. And Sheikh Ali answered him in the very beginning and said, I studied for 14 years. And that there is, in Islam, a way that you decide who is a scholar and who is not. And only scholars can give opinions on these things. So your ISIS and Al-Qaeda guys might be super dedicated, but they cannot give you scholarly answers. But there's no right way in any religion, in my opinion. Sorry if that bothers people. There's many opinions. There's many Christianities. There's many Islams. And we're not proposing any of them as an answer, but we are proposing discussion. And our videos have three main themes. ISIS did not function by what most people would define as Islam, so it was un-Islamic. It was highly barbaric, even to the people that joined, and it was corrupt. So they did not live by these high ideals. So I'm an insider, and we want an insider to denounce the group. I don't mean me personally, but as an example, the insider is saying, I've been there. You can learn from me. And we know by psychology that humans learn by the stories of other people. We're a species that has told stories to each other for eons. That's how we learn, from other human stories, from myths, from fables, from real human beings. So we're using real human beings to tell insider stories. We're not trying to sell any kind of Islam. And as far as living by our own values, and our own values say children don't go to prison, right? Well, there are Belgian children in prison. We've seen them. It breaks my heart. I wish he would bring them home.
Yeah, I'm always reminded of those jihadis from Great Britain who were headed off to Syria and ordered on Amazon.com Islam for Dummies, which they did.
Yeah, well, just some small tools on how to fight back on our values. Yes, but we believe as OCAM, we're of course not a political player, but we have a department of CVE, countering violent extremism, that thinks about this and gives ideas, and our ideas quite often go in that direction of, well, we have to support. And that is something that we can do. Is you can support the modern Islam scholars who exist in amongst our midst, but who often have no way to get hurt because they are facing a bulwark of propaganda that comes from abroad. What we as governments, and I think, should try to do is to promote them and to give them the necessary space. For instance, by not allowing the official Islamic representations to be dominated only by foreign powers or by countries that have a stake in our country, other countries, but give space to local scholars who have a deep and good knowledge of Islam. I also think of gender. Until so far, it's mainly dominated by men, the Muslim representation. But in my opinion, there's also the half of them are women, but we don't see them in the official representation of Muslim communities. I think there the governments can act and can ask, impose that on them, that also women should be present in the boards and in the Muslim representative institutions. And last but not least is perhaps also, that is not only from Belgium, it is an idea that is growing, but perhaps we should think of promoting Islam science in Europe and make it possible that we have training or that we have university programs for imams here in Europe. Now there is a lack of training or formation, and they have to go abroad where they are taught a version of Islam that is perhaps not always easy to understand for the people here, that is alien, strange. So I think these are possibilities that we try to think of, give more space to the local and scholars who are there, who are moderate and who have a modern vision of Islam. But it's, of course, a difficult debate, and that is beyond the scope of what we do at OCAM.
Listen, I hate to end the party here, but we're 30 minutes over our time. So I think we can probably continue the discussion informally outside, but I think we have to wrap it up up here. So I want to thank Anne and all the participants, and I want to thank all of you for coming.